Let me tell you something nobody warns you about when you die. It's not the darkness. It's not the silence. It's the smell. And I know exactly what smell I'm talking about. The last thing I smelled was snake venom, specifically the venom of a silverback king cobra, the most expensive and most dangerous specimen in my entire collection. I had spent 30 years as a wandering herbalist. Not a doctor, not an academy scholar, just a man with a bag, a knife, and a deep obsession with things that could kill you if you touched them wrong. I traveled every mountain range in 3 kingdoms, every poisonous swamp, every forgotten forest where local villagers would grab my arm and warn me not to go further. I always went further. I cataloged over 400 venomous species. I knew which mushroom shut down your liver in 6 hours. I knew which flower made grown men cry without understanding why. But snakes were my real life's work. Their patterns, temperaments, venom compositions, behavioral triggers, the exact angle of the strike, the millisecond of warning before they moved. I was considered the foremost expert on serpents in 3 kingdoms, which makes what happened next either the most ironic event in history or, honestly, completely inevitable. I was cataloging my silverback king cobra, a specimen I had spent 8 years tracking across 14 countries and more close calls than I could count. He was beautiful. I named him Gerald. Don't judge me. I name all of them. It keeps me calm. Gerald did not appreciate being cataloged at 2 in the morning by someone who'd had slightly too much rice wine. He struck faster than I'd ever seen him move. Here's the thing about being an expert. Expertise doesn't make you immune. It just means you understand exactly what's happening to you. I knew the venom composition. I knew the progression. I knew precisely how many minutes I had. Expertise is precise that way. I spent them watching Gerald settle back into his tank with the posture of a creature who had made his point and considered the matter closed. I sat against the wall of my research hut, looked at him, and said, "Fair enough," and then I died. But here's what nobody tells you about dying. Sometimes it doesn't stick. I became aware of myself in pieces. First, cold. Not mountain cold or river cold. Something older. The kind of cold that exists between things in the spaces where the world forgets to be warm. Second, small. Not metaphorically. Physically. Everything around me was enormous, in a way that didn't register as real until I tried to move and discovered I had no arms. No legs either. What I had was a body approximately 40 centimeters long, covered in scales that caught what little light existed in the narrow rock crack I apparently called home. And I had a tongue, a forked one. I flicked it. Information arrived in ways my human brain struggled to translate. Heat signatures, chemical traces, vibration in the stone. The world came together not through vision, but through something like full-body awareness. That I had no word for. The world assembled itself not through eyes, which were functional but secondary, but through a sense I had no name for and had never needed one for. I was a snake, a very small snake. I did what any reasonable person would do in this situation. I panicked, silently, because snakes don't scream. I discovered that immediately. All that adrenaline and nowhere for it to go except frantic writhing that accomplished nothing except scraping scales on granite. Eventually I stopped. I breathed, or whatever snakes do that approximates breathing. My ribs moved. Air came in. Air went out. 30 years of wilderness survival. Panic had never once helped me. I assessed. Body, serpentine. Small. Apparently healthy. Location, rock crack, elevated. Forest environment based on pine resin in the air. Status, alive. Conscious, inexplicably reincarnated. Equipment, none. Allies, none. Enemies, everything larger than me, which was almost everything. I was beginning to see a theme. It was at this point I noticed the text. It hung in my field of awareness, faint and luminous, made of characters I somehow understood despite belonging to no language I had ever encountered. System initialization complete. Host identified. Serpent class rank F. Evolution path locked. Conditions for unlock. Survived F rank. In my 30 years of cataloging, I had developed a personal ranking system for venomous creatures. F rank was the category I used for things that died if you looked at them wrong. The universe had given me a body I myself would have classified as F rank. The universe, I decided, had a sense of humor. Or possibly a grudge. Let me explain what F rank means in the world I'd woken up into. Everything had a rank. Animals, plants, humans, the dungeons. Those dungeons tore open in the earth and released monsters that tested whether civilization deserved to survive another generation. Rank F meant prey. Rank E meant you were still mostly prey, but occasionally caught something smaller than you. Rank D was where you started to matter. Rank C was where hunters paid attention. Rank B was where legends began. Rank A was where war started. Rank S was where countries ended. And mean F, the absolute floor of a world built entirely on the logic of predator and prey. Gerald, my original Gerald, the silverback king cobra, would have been a solid rank C by this world's standards. I, in my new body, was approximately one step above a worm. I crawled out of the rock crack on the third day. I want to be precise about what that cost me. 3 days of lying in that crack, practicing, learning to move in a body with no limbs. Every muscle memory I had ever built was gone. Entirely different proprioception, entirely different spatial logic. 3 days before I could move in a straight line without accidentally nodding around a root. On the morning of the fourth day, I slid out onto the boulder's surface and sat in the weak sunlight, and felt it hit my scales. For the first time since waking up in this body, I understood why snakes spend so much time doing exactly this. The warmth moved through me like something between food and joy. I could have stayed there all day. I was considering staying there when something cast a shadow across me. I looked up with my heat sense before my eyes adjusted. Large, warm, feathered, beak curved like a blade, looking directly at me. A mountain hawk, looking at me with the professional interest of a predator that has never had a moral complication in its life. I moved, not thought, not decision, pure borrowed instinct from whatever consciousness had been in this body before me. The instinct said, rock crack, now. I made it, barely. The hawk's talons scraped granite where I had been sitting. I pressed into the back of the crack and listened to it sit on my boulder for 47 minutes. Annoyed, before finally giving up. This was my first lesson in my new life. I was not the expert anymore. Every piece of knowledge I had about snakes was about snakes that were already developed, already grown, already dangerous. I was 40 centimeters of potential wrapped in a body the local wildlife viewed as a light snack. But the system had said, conditions for unlock, survive. That was the whole instruction. In 30 years of wilderness experience, I had learned that the simplest instructions are usually the hardest ones, and the most important. I started building a mental inventory of useful skills. Things I could not do: set traps, create antidotes, extract venom samples, take notes. Use any of the 147 tools I carried for 3 decades. A long list, painful to look at. Things I could do: move silently through small spaces, detect heat signatures, read chemical information in the air, strike with speed I hope would scale as I grew. Short list, but not empty. On day 5, I hunted for the first time. Not a monster, not a magical creature. A field mouse eating seeds at the boulder base. It sat there with the complete moral serenity of an animal that had never once in its short life thought about snakes. I watched it for a long time. Here's something 30 years of observation teaches you. A snake that thinks too much about the ethics of being a snake will starve. I was not going to starve. I struck. The mouse was gone before it ever knew I existed. I lay there afterward, processing what had happened in several simultaneous ways. Physiological satisfaction, strange and new. Professional appreciation for the strike angle, and a faint shimmer in my field of awareness. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 0.3%. System note: consumption of higher rank prey accelerates growth. I read that last line for Tom's. Consumption of higher rank prey accelerates growth. I thought about the hawk, about how fast it had moved, about surviving by borrowed instinct and nothing else. Then I thought about what 30 years had taught me about predators. Every single one has a weakness, no matter how strong, how fast, how perfectly evolved. You just have to be patient enough to find it. I spent the next weeks mapping my territory. Not with hands. I had none. But I had always had an exceptional memory, and I memorized everything within 500 meters of my boulder. Every rock, every root, every hollow, every water source, every game trail. The hawk's patrol patterns, dawn and dusk, 3 favorite perches, territorial within those hours. I memorized its behavioral tells. I memorized the deer trails and where deer paused to listen before crossing open ground. The way sound moved through the forest. The way smell moved through it differently. The vibration patterns in the root systems. Like slow conversation between trees. 30 years of expertise compressed into a brain the size of a walnut. On day 19, the system spoke again without being asked. Anomaly detected. Host demonstrates atypical behavioral patterns for assigned rank. Cognitive capability exceeds body rank by significant margin. Evolution threshold calculation updated. I'd been noticed. I filed that away because there were more pressing matters. On day 23, Following a scent trail toward a secondary water source on the eastern slope, the ground changed. The air got heavier without getting warmer. The light bent slightly, not dramatically, just enough that my perception kept catching movement where nothing moved. My ribs recognized the vibration as wrong. A crack in the earth, narrow at the entrance, widening as it went down, approximately 30 centimeters wide. My width exactly. I sat outside it for a long time. The system provided information without being asked. Dungeon detected, rank E, beginner's hollow. Contents, rank F and E creatures. Survival probability, 23%. I appreciated the honesty. I also noticed it said 23%, not 0. Here's what most people misunderstand about probability. 23% doesn't mean you'll probably die. That is not a guarantee of failure. It is a guarantee that success is possible. I thought about what 8 months of eating field mice would look like. 8 months of hawk patrol patterns and hoping nothing found me. I looked at the dungeon crack that was exactly my width. For the first time since waking up in this body, small was an advantage. Everything larger than me, including the hawk, could not fit through that entrance. Nothing could follow me in. I went in. The dark was irrelevant. Heat sense, vibration, and chemical information from every tongue flick. The walls were close enough that nothing could approach from behind without significant warning. The first creature was a cave beetle. Rank F, completely blind, with one structural weakness, the gap where thorax met abdomen. That gap in the chitinous shell, I knew from 30 years of research it was exactly 2 millimeters wide. I struck through it. I struck through that gap. The beetle was done before it registered I existed. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 2.1%. Toxic resistance acquired, minor chitinous venom. I read that last line again. Toxic resistance acquired through consumption. 30 years of study had taught me that toxicity is the great equalizer. The smallest creature with the right venom can kill something 1,000 times its size. That principle had not changed just because I was now the small creature. And I was, apparently, a system that built resistance and capability through consumption, not just growing and adapting. This changed my arithmetic in ways that took me several minutes to fully appreciate. I spent 6 hours in the dungeon, 14 cave beetles, 3 rank F grubs that tasted like old boots but gave me something called mineral essence, and 1 rank E dungeon rat that required everything I had. The dungeon rat was faster than me, smarter than the beetles, and had teeth that could cause genuine damage. I did not get through that fight without consequence. It landed 1 bite. My scales held, barely, and then essence core extracted, rank E. Integration, venom gland enhancement paralytic compound added. My venom had just been upgraded with a paralytic compound. I slid out of the dungeon crack into late afternoon light and sat on warm stone. My body had grown to 47 centimeters instead of 40. Subtle, not dramatic, but I could feel the difference in how my muscles moved, how my scales lay against the stone beneath me. My venom could paralyze creatures up to rank E. I had territorial knowledge that would take a human tracker months to develop, and I had confirmed something crucial. The system rewarded what I brought to it, not just what I was. That distinction mattered enormously. 23% survival probability. I had survived, with improvements that I hadn't even factored into the original calculation. The hawk came back at dusk, like clockwork, landing on its favorite perch with the arrogance of a creature that has never once questioned its position. I watched it from shadow in the rocks. I thought about its wingspan, its hollow bones, the way it carried its head forward when hunting. That forward tilt was a behavioral tell I'd cataloged on day 4. When I had nothing to do but observe and plan and wait, I could not win a direct confrontation at this size. I was going to win a very indirect one, on terms entirely of my own choosing. Because 30 years in the wilderness had taught me the thing that matters more than strength, more than rank, more than anything else. You don't fight on your enemy's terms. You fight on yours. And I was a snake in a world that hadn't yet realized what I was becoming. On day 14, a hunter had crouched near my boulder, looked directly at my crack, and said to his partner, in a language I still understood, "Nothing here. Probably already dead. Probably already dead." I had field experience, a growing system, paralytic venom, and territory mapped to precision that took months to replicate. I liked that assumption enormously. I intended to maintain it for exactly as long as it continued to serve me well. The most dangerous creature in any ecosystem is never the one at the top of the food chain. It's the one nobody is watching. I was going to keep being that creature for exactly as long as it remained useful. The hawk would be first, then the dungeon, again and again, until the system had nothing left to give me at rank E. Then rank E. Then further than that. The day I eat something S-glass for breakfast is coming. I have already started planning the menu. You wouldn't have bet on me. That's fine. I've spent 30 years being underestimated. I'm very good at it. 30 years of practice across 3 kingdoms will do that, and I was only just getting started. Which S-Class boss do you think goes down first? Drop it in the comments. I already know the answer, and I want to see who's thinking like a Hunter. The hawk died on day 31. I want to be clear that I did not feel good about this. I felt precise about it. There is a difference. Feeling good implies emotion. Feeling precise implies 30 years of field experience applied to a single calculated outcome. Here is what I had learned about mountain hawks over 4 weeks of observation. They hunt at dawn and dusk. They patrol the same routes in the same order every single time. They are creatures of absolute habit. In the wild, habit is usually an advantage. When your prey cannot predict you, habit costs you nothing. The problem is when your prey can predict you. When your prey has been watching you for 4 weeks and knows exactly which perch you favor when the wind comes from the east. I had also learned something specific about hawks that most people who haven't spent time with them would never think to notice. Hawks don't look down when they land. They look out. They land on a perch and they scan the horizon immediately, because threats to a hawk come from the same level or above, not below. Nothing threatens a hawk from below. This is a behavioral assumption built into every hawk that has ever lived. It is a completely reasonable assumption, until it isn't. I had spent 3 days positioning myself, not on the boulder, beneath the boulder's north face, in a crevice that put me at the base of the hawk's 3rd favorite perch. Its 3rd favorite, not its 1st. Because a creature with good instincts will sometimes vary its routine, but never more than to its 2nd or 3rd option. I had cataloged all 3. I was there before dawn. Waiting. My new paralytic venom gland warm and ready. My body at 50 centimeters now, grown from repeated dungeon runs and increasingly bold prey selection. The hawk came at first light. It landed exactly where I had calculated. It looked out at the horizon exactly as hawks do. It did not look down. It never occurred to it to look down. Nothing had ever threatened a hawk from below, so nothing ever would. I struck from below, through the gap between the leg scales where the feathers don't reach, the one place on a hawk where the skin is thin enough that my fangs could find perches. The paralytic compound did its work in 11 seconds. I timed it because I'm that kind of person. 11 seconds and the hawk's grip on the perch failed. It made a sound I had never heard from a hawk before, and I have heard a great many hawks over 30 years. Confused. Genuinely confused. In the way that a creature is confused when something happens that has never happened in the history of its species. Then it was still. I sat beside it for a moment. Nothing personal, I told it. You were very good at what you did. Then I consumed it. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 18.4%. Aerial prey resistance acquired. Thermal detection enhanced. My heat sense, which had already been significantly better than the standard F-rank Serpent's, had just improved again. I could now detect temperature differentials of less than half a degree, anywhere within my sensory range, which had also expanded. The hawk weighed approximately 2 kilograms. I had just eaten something 20 times my previous body weight's worth of system value. I lay in the sun for 6 hours and processed and grew. When I was done, I was 61 centimeters long, nearly a third more than I had been when I woke up in this world. I could feel my scales reforming to accommodate the new length, a sensation that had no human equivalent, like waking up and finding your body had reorganized itself overnight. On day 32, the system spoke again. Evolution threshold, 31%. Current progress, 34%. Threshold exceeded. Initiating first evolution. I had not known there would be an evolution. The system had told me the path was locked until I survived. It had not mentioned what surviving actually unlocked. I found out over the next 12 hours. Lying completely still in my rock crack while something I can only describe as a deep restructuring happened inside me. My venom glands doubled in size. My heat-sensing pits became more numerous. My scales thickened along my dorsal ridge. My muscle fiber density increased in a way I could feel but not see. When it was done, the system gave me my new status. First evolution complete. Rank upgraded, F2E. Title updated, Scale Bearer of the Forgotten Bloodline. Awakened. Ranky, I had gone from the bottom of the world to one step above the bottom. To a human, this would seem like almost nothing. To me, sitting in a forest where everything had previously wanted to eat me, this was the difference between prey and predator. Not a big difference, but a real one, and real differences compound. I went back into the dungeon that same afternoon. Not the same dungeon, a different one, further up the eastern slope that I had located on day 28, but set aside because the system had rated it rank D. to dangerous before the evolution. Exactly right after it, the entrance was wider than the first dungeon, wide enough that I had to be more careful about what followed me in. But the rewards would scale accordingly, and scaling rewards, compounding growth, were exactly what every decision I made was now oriented toward. Dungeon detected, rank D, Serpent's Cradle. Contents, rank D and rank C creatures. Survival probability, 31%. System note, dungeon appears resonant with host bloodline. Resonant with host bloodline. That was new. That was a word choice that deserved more thought later. I filed it and went in. The Serpent's Cradle was different from the first dungeon in every way that mattered. Where the beginner's hollow had been narrow and damp and small, this one opened downward into chambers. Real chambers, with ceilings high enough that things could move freely, and formations on the walls that glowed faintly with something that tasted, when I flicked my tongue near them, like compressed essence. The first creature I encountered was a stone crawler. Rank D, heavily armored, moves sideways like a crab but with 6 legs and a tail that carries a contact venom designed to cause intense localized pain. I knew the species. I'd cataloged it. In my old life I'd extracted its venom for research twice, in controlled conditions, with gloves and antidotes prepared. The contact venom was unpleasant but not dangerous to something my size in small doses. I had the research to back that statement up. More importantly, I had spent 6 hours consuming cave beetles whose chitinous venom my system had already built. Resistance to chitinous venom and stone crawler contact venom share a base compound. Not identical, but related enough that my existing resistance covered approximately 60% of the effect. I tested this by letting the stone crawler's tail graze my scales. The localized pain arrived. It was about 30% as bad as it should have been. I filed the result as confirmation of my resistance data, and then killed the stone crawler with 2 precise strikes to his exposed joints. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 7%. Stone hide adaptation acquired. Contact venom resistance upgraded. Stone hide adaptation. I looked at my scales. They looked the same, but when I moved across rough rock, the friction was different, less. My dorsal scales had restructured themselves, microscopically but genuinely, to handle abrasive rocky surfaces with significantly less friction. I was 34 days old in this body, and the system was rebuilding me from the inside out with every creature I consumed. This was not what I had expected reincarnation to look like. I spent 4 hours in the Serpent's Cradle the first day. I did not attempt the rank C creatures I occasionally sense deeper in, not yet. You don't skip steps in wilderness survival. You build. What I did find, in the third chamber, stopped me entirely. Not because of danger, because of something I recognized immediately. Coiled in the corner, asleep, was a serpent. Rank D by its aura, about 1.5 meters long, with scales the color of old bronze and a head shaped like a broad spade. A bronze pit viper. I had cataloged this species in my previous life. A genuinely impressive animal, with hemotoxic venom that could cause serious complications even in large mammals. But that's not what stopped me. What stopped me was the fact that it was sleeping in a rank D dungeon, which meant it either belonged here or had somehow ended up here and was managing. And it was alone. I recognized the behavioral signature of a solitary ambush predator and its chosen territory. This was its chamber. It had been here long enough to make it home. I watched it for a long time. My new thermal detection showed me the precise outline of its body heat against the cooler stone. I could see every breath it took. Here's something I had never expected to encounter in this situation. A professional dilemma. I was a serpent encountering another serpent. In my old life, I had never harmed a snake unnecessarily. 30 years of study. I had extracted venom under controlled conditions, but I had never killed a snake for anything other than essential research. The idea sat in my chest, or wherever feelings sit when you no longer have a chest, with genuine and unexpected discomfort. Then the bronze pit viper opened one eye. It looked directly at me with a slow, cold assessment of a predator that has been aware of my presence for considerably longer than I had assumed. We regarded each other. To serpents in a chamber of glowing rock, one of us considerably larger and more established, one of us containing the compressed knowledge of 3 decades of serpent expertise. It struck without warning. I had been watching for the coil compression that precedes a strike in this species, and I saw it happen and still barely moved in time. Its fangs grazed my new dorsal scales. The stone hide adaptation I had just acquired was the only reason they didn't penetrate fully. Even so, a small amount of hemotoxin entered. Toxin detected. Hemotoxic venom bronze variant. Cross-referencing existing resistances. Partial resistance available. Processing. Partial resistance. Not full. My system was building a counter in real time, but it wasn't done yet. I could feel the hemotoxin working, a spreading warmth in my dorsal area that my body was fighting. I had two options: leave and come back when I built more resistance, or finish this now while the toxin hadn't yet compounded. 30 years of field experience had given me a very clear principle about confrontations with venomous creatures. If you're already hit, waiting rarely helps. I struck back, not at the head. The bronze pit viper's head response time was faster than mine. I chose the body, behind the neck, targeting the nerve cluster. I struck at the body, behind the neck, using my paralytic venom on the nerve cluster that runs along the cervical vertebrae. The bronze pit viper spasmed. Not dead. My paralytic wasn't powerful enough for a rank D creature at full paralyze, but disrupted enough, confused enough. 1 second of confusion in a predator fight is a very long time. I used that second. 2 more strikes, precision placed, both carrying full venom payload. By the time the paralytic wore off enough for it to respawn, the hemotoxin in my own bloodstream was losing the fight against my resistance system, and the bronze pit viper was still. Essence core extracted, rank D. Analyzing, integration, hemotoxic capability added to venom profile. I lay beside it for a long time. I'm not sure if what I felt was guilt. It might have been something adjacent to respect. You were excellent, I told it. Your ambush timing was perfect. I survived because of prior knowledge, not because I was better. Then I consumed it anyway, because the rules of this world were not the rules of my old one, and I had accepted that on day 5 when I ate the field mouse. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 31%. Serpent bloodline resonance detected. Special integration initiated. Serpent bloodline resonance. That phrase again. Something about this body, or the bloodline the system kept referencing, was triggering additional integration from serpent prey specifically. I waited for the special integration. It took 3 hours. When it finished, the system gave me something I hadn't expected. Ancestral memory fragment received. Decoding. Fragment, the forgotten bloodline. Partial record. Host species origin, ancient heavenly serpent class, degraded through generations. Current manifestation, trace lineage only. Dormant capabilities, multiple. Bloodline restoration, in progress. I read that several times. I had been so focused on the practical mechanics of growing and evolving that I hadn't thought seriously about why the system called me the scale bearer of the forgotten bloodline. I was, apparently, the distant descendant of something that had not been F-rank. Not even close to F-rank. Something old enough and powerful enough that the system called it the ancient heavenly serpent class. Whatever that meant. Whatever my original ancestor had been. 30 years of herbalist expertise had just been recontextualized entirely. I wasn't just a man who happened to know about snakes, reborn into a serpent's body by some indifferent cosmic mechanism. I was a man who happened to know about snakes and had been placed by whatever mechanism governs reincarnation into the degraded remnant of an ancient bloodline. The system hadn't put me here randomly, or if it had, the randomness had its own logic. I was the most qualified possible consciousness to inhabit this particular body, and somewhere in this body, buried under generations of degradation, were capabilities that the system was slowly beginning to unlock. I felt something shift in my understanding of my situation. I had been thinking of myself as a man trying to survive in a snake's body. I needed to start thinking of myself as a bloodline, trying to remember what it used to be. On day 37, I was 78 centimeters long and rank E. My venom profile combined paralytic and hemotoxic capabilities, stone hide dorsal adaptation, enhanced thermal detection, and aerial prey resistance were also now part of what I was. Growing fast, I had run the Serpent's Cradle dungeon for times. I had not yet attempted the rank C creatures in its deepest chamber. I was not ready. I knew I was not ready. Knowing when you're not ready is one of the most important survival skills there is. What I was ready for was the thing I had been putting off. The thing that required me to be something other than cautious. There was a village 3 kilometers east, and I had been mapping it for 37 days from a safe distance. Not because I planned to act on it immediately, because information is always worth having, especially information about powerful things near your territory. Because 30 years of wilderness experience had taught me that knowing your environment includes knowing every element of it, including the human ones. I knew, from scent tracking and vibration monitoring, that the village had approximately 200 residents. I knew it had a weekly market based on the pattern of increased foot traffic on a specific day. I knew there were 3 hunters based in that village, based on the specific scent profile that dungeon active fighters carry on their equipment. I knew this because their boots were different from the farmers' boots, heavier, more reinforced, with the scent profile of people who spent significant time in dungeons. 2 of the 3 were rank C, based on the small amount of rank C essence that clung to their equipment. 1 was rank B. I had not seen a rank B hunter before except at a great distance. The rank B hunter had passed near my territory twice. Both times I had pressed myself into rock and stayed perfectly still. Rank B aura at this range, even for a creature with no intention toward me, felt like standing too close to a bonfire. Something very large was happening. I had felt it for days before I understood what it was. A directional vibration in the earth, coming from deep underground, moving northeast. Dungeon surge detected. Threat assessment, rank B event. Estimated time to surface breach, 72 hours. Recommendation, evacuate territory. A dungeon surge. I knew the concept from the system's ambient information. The way you know things in dreams without knowing how. A dungeon surge was what happened when a dungeon's monster population grew beyond the dungeon's capacity to contain it. The monsters broke out, into the surface, into the world, into places like, for example, the forest where I currently lived. A rank B surge meant the leading monsters would be rank B creatures. Rank B creatures at this stage of my development could eat me like I had eaten the field mouse, without noticing. Evacuate territory. The system's recommendation was perfectly sensible. It was also, when I thought about it carefully, interesting advice. Interesting because evacuation assumed I would go somewhere safer. But here is the thing about being a creature with my capabilities and my knowledge in a world with a leveling system. Safe doesn't compound. Safe keeps you alive. Dangerous, approached correctly, makes you stronger. And a dungeon surge meant a massive concentration of higher ranked creatures in one location. A massive concentration of higher ranked creatures meant a massive concentration of potential essence cores. It meant growth at a rate I couldn't achieve in a dozen normal dungeon runs. It meant risk, obviously. Risk significant enough that the system had used its first unambiguous recommendation in 37 days to tell me to run. I thought about this for a long time. I thought about the difference between the creature I'd been on day 1, pressing itself into a crack while a hawk sat on my boulder for 47 minutes, and the creature I was now, 78 centimeters, 2 compound venom, enhanced senses, dungeons cleared for times, first evolution complete, bloodline starting to wake up. The system told me to evacuate. I appreciated the concern, genuinely. Then I decided to get considerably closer instead. Not recklessly. I want to be absolutely clear about that. 30 years of wilderness survival does not produce recklessness. It produces calculated risk assessment, which looks like recklessness from the outside but is a completely different thing from the inside. I found a position on a ridge above the projected surge zone, far enough to observe, close enough that if something died near me I could reach it before any competitors did. The ground broke on the morning of the 3rd day. Not dramatically, not like an explosion, slowly, the way something very large and very heavy pushes through soil because the soil simply cannot hold anymore. First came the sound, a vibration that my ribs translated before my ears had any input on the matter. Then came the smell, dungeon essence, concentrated, rank enough to taste from 200 meters. Then the first creature came through, a rank B ogre bear, 7 feet at the shoulder with natural bone plating across its back. 7 feet at the shoulder, armored with natural bone plating across its back. Heat signature so powerful it was like looking at a small sun through my thermal detection. It shook soil off itself like a dog coming out of water. It looked around. It identified the forest as a place where things were smaller than it. This appeared to satisfy it completely. And behind it came more. A rank C stone wolf pack, 8 strong. To rank B giant wasps that I had not expected, and which made my entire threat assessment recalibrate instantly. The villagers were going to have a very bad day. I registered this fact with a part of my brain that was still 37 days and partially human. A part of me that could still perform something like moral reasoning, which was becoming a smaller part with every passing week. I thought about the rank B hunter I'd sensed twice near my territory, about whether the village had enough capacity to handle a rank B surge, about the 200 people I'd been monitoring for 5 weeks. I thought about my 78 centimeters and my 2 compound venom, and my 1 completed evolution, about what Forgotten Bloodline Awakened actually meant in practical terms, against a rank B ogre bear. And then I thought about the rank C stone wolves, 8 of them, in a pack, moving toward the village. Against them, my calculation was different, much different. I moved, not toward the ogre bear, toward the wolves. I caught the pack's rearmost members separated from the others by a boulder formation, isolated for 6 seconds while the pack's attention was forward. 6 seconds is a very long time when you know what you're doing. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 12%. Pack predator essence acquired. Sensory network enhancement detected. The wolf's pack mates noticed the absence within 30 seconds. They all turned at once, pack coordination running like a reflex. All 7 of them looked at the place where their 8th had been, then at me, a serpent approximately the length of their forelook, sitting beside what was left of their companion. 7 pairs of rank C eyes, looking at me, processing what they were seeing. Their threat assessment systems running calculations that came out, as suspected, as, "This does not compute." I struck the second one before they finished computing. I was gone back into the rock formations before the pack could reorganize their attack. Behind me, I heard howling, confused howling, the sound of predators that had just encountered something that didn't follow the rules they were built to expect. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 11%. Additional pack predator essence acquired. Evolution threshold, 31%. Current progress, 87%. 87% toward my second evolution. In the middle of a rank B dungeon surge, with 5 rank C stone wolves still alive, I was approaching my second evolution, in the middle of a rank B dungeon surge, surrounded by creatures that could end me without slowing down. 5 remaining rank C stone wolves somewhere behind me. A rank B ogre bear 400 meters northwest. Objectively not ideal timing. This was not the situation a reasonable entity would seek out. I was perfectly aware of that. I was also not a reasonable entity anymore. I was also 78 centimeters of accelerating potential with 30 years of expertise and a bloodline that was becoming less dormant by the hour. I heard the rank B hunter's voice first, carrying the particular authority of someone who has survived enough to understand exactly how much trouble a rank B surge represents. He had arrived from the village with the 2 rank C hunters, and his voice carried the particular authority of someone who had survived long enough to know exactly how much trouble a rank B surge represents. Wolves went into the eastern formations. Something drove them in. Stay alert. His aura washed over the area like a wave, and I felt it press against my scales even through 20 meters of rock between us. He was strong, much stronger than anything I had encountered. But he wasn't looking for a snake. He was looking for wolves. And the forest, as I had learned in 37 days of watching it from below, contains many things that nobody is actively looking for. Evolution threshold reached. Second evolution initiating. The timing was, in retrospect, extremely inconvenient. Evolution requires stillness, and stillness was not something the current situation offered freely. The deep restructuring of my internal systems needed me to be in one place for an extended period, and that place was currently between a rank B hunter, 5 rank C wolves, and a rank B ogre bear. I found the deepest rock crack within reach and pressed myself in. The evolution was not asking my permission. It was happening whether I cooperated or not. I cooperated. What choice did I have? The evolution was not asking permission. It was happening whether I was ready or not. I lay still in the dark and felt my body rearrange itself for the second time, more extensively than the first, while the sounds of a rank B dungeon surge played out above me. Bone plates forming along my dorsal ridge. Venom glands reorganizing. A third compound being integrated alongside the existing 2. My thermal detection upgrading to something I couldn't name from inside the process. It took 4 hours. When it was done, I was 93 centimeters long, and the system had things to tell me. Second evolution complete. Rank upgraded, E to D. Title updated, Scale Bearer of the Forgotten Bloodline. Fragment restored. New ability unlocked. Venom synthesis host may now generate novel venom compounds from consumed essence. Venom synthesis. The ability to create new venoms, not just accumulate them from prey. Create them from the essence I consumed. I was a rank D serpent with a 3-compound venom profile, and the ability to synthesize new compounds from consumed essence. Enhanced thermal detection. Stone hide adaptation. Bloodline ancestry in the ancient heavenly serpent class with dormant capability still locked, and 30 years of biological expertise that had just become significantly more applicable to my actual daily life than it had ever been before. I slid out of my crack into a forest that was considerably quieter than when I had gone in. The surge had peaked and the hunters had apparently done their work. I could smell the aftermath, spent essence, the specific scent that dungeons leave when their creatures are killed far from their origin point, and I could smell something else entirely. Something that changed my assessment of the situation significantly. The rank B ogre bear, not dead, moving northward away from the village, retreating in the way that large creatures retreat when they've encountered something strong enough to discourage them. The rank B hunter had handled it. Of course he had. That was what rank B hunters did. I noted his position and stored it. Then I did a full inventory of my new capabilities. Venom synthesis required consumed essence as raw material. I had significant reserves from the 2 stone wolves. I needed to understand the parameters. I spent an hour synthesizing carefully, testing combinations of my existing 3 venom compounds. The paralytic base I'd acquired from the dungeon rat, the hemotoxic compound from the bronze pit viper, and a new acid-adjacent compound I'd acquired from the cave beetles but hadn't fully integrated until this evolution. What I found was that the 3 compounds could be produced individually or combined, each with distinct delivery mechanisms and effect profiles. Combined, the paralytic and hemotoxic worked against each other slightly. The hemotoxin accelerated circulation, which worked against the paralytic's goal of slowing everything down. But the acid compound was different. It didn't interact with the others the way the first did. It had a separate delivery pathway. I could produce it independently through a secretion along my scale edges rather than my fangs. A passive delivery system running alongside the active one. I had just invented, or rather discovered, a contact venom along my body surface. Passive and active delivery systems for different venom types. I was 93 centimeters long, and I had become genuinely, objectively dangerous to everything below rank B. That was not a small category. Not to a rank B creature. Not yet. But to everything below that, I had become something new. Something the world around me had not cataloged. Something nobody was watching for. I thought about the 200 people in the village 3 kilometers east, and about whether anything I'd just accomplished was relevant to their situation. About the rank B hunter who had just handled a rank B ogre bear with what had sounded, from my position in the rock crack, like professional competence. About the hunters who passed through this forest and rode off small creatures, without looking too carefully. About the creature that nobody suspected was in these rocks. Rank D now, passive contact venom. Venom synthesis capability, 93 centimeters and evolving. Forgotten bloodline with capabilities the system kept calling dormant, plural, meaning there were more. The day was coming. I had said this before, in the early weeks, as something to hold on to. Now I was saying it differently. Not as comfort, as calculation. The S-class bosses that the hunters feared, the ones that ended wars and collapsed kingdoms. They had never encountered a serpent with my background. They had never encountered anything that hunted them the way I was going to hunt them. I was learning the rules of this world from the ground up, literally. I understood its dungeon systems and its ranking logic and its creature behaviors in ways that the hunters above me, with their human perspectives and their human tools, could not. The most dangerous predator is the one who understands the game better than everyone else playing it. I was that predator. I was becoming more the predator with every passing day. The forest was quiet now. The surge was over. The hunters were returning to the village. A new day was beginning, and I was a different creature than I had been when it started. I flicked my tongue. The air tasted like opportunity. It always did, to something that had learned over 30 years exactly how to read it. And I had 30 years of knowing how to read it, compressed into a body that was finally starting to deserve the knowledge it carried. Not yet, but getting there. Getting there faster than anyone who might ever think to worry about me would believe possible. Which is exactly how I wanted it. The one advantage I still had that no rank could take away. Nobody was watching the right things. On day 41, I made my first mistake in this world. Not a survival mistake, a strategic one. And it taught me something I hadn't expected to need to learn. Here is what happened. I was running the Serpent's Cradle for the 5th time, specifically targeting the rank C corridor in the deep chamber that I had been avoiding since day 29. I was rank D now. My venom profile was more complex than anything the dungeon's creatures had evolved to handle. My thermal detection was precise enough that I could map a chamber entirely by heat signature before setting a single scale inside it. I was ready. I had done the calculation, and the calculation said the rank C corridor was survivable at my current capabilities with a reasonable margin. What the calculation did not account for was the rank C dungeon toad that I had moved into the corridor since my last scouting pass 3 days ago. Dungeon toads are ambush predators. They do not move unless they are repositioning for a better ambush position. I had cataloged this species extensively in my previous life. What I had not cataloged was that dungeon toads in dungeon environments specifically grow to approximately 3 times the size of surface specimens. because dungeon essence accelerates their development. The surface dungeon toad I had cataloged was approximately 40 centimeters long. This one was 120, 3 times the expected size. The one that dropped from the ceiling onto my dorsal ridge was 1 meter and 20 centimeters of solid muscle and adhesive mucus. The mucus was the problem. Dungeon toad mucus is a binding compound. It doesn't paralyze, it adheres, like biological epoxy, fixing whatever it contacts to the toad's body surface. I hit the ground stuck to the back of a creature 3 times my length, with significantly more mass than me, thrashing in a direction that was rapidly becoming detrimental to my structural integrity. Here is what I did in the next 4 seconds, because in a situation like this there are no slow decisions. First option, my paralytic venom, injected at the toad's spine. Takes 11 seconds minimum to work. I had approximately 8 seconds before the thrashing caused damage I couldn't recover from quickly. Second option, hemotoxic venom, faster systemic effect, 3 to 4 seconds. Problem, the toad was not bleeding anywhere I could currently reach, which meant hemotoxic venom required a delivery point I didn't have access to. Third option, the acid compound, passive delivery through my scale edges. Currently active because I was panicking, which apparently triggers passive venom secretion as an automatic threat response. The acid compound was dissolving the mucus dot slowly. Too slowly, but it was doing something. I needed to accelerate it. I had spent time, after the second evolution, exploring compound interactions. With my new synthesis capability, running experiments purely out of scientific habit, I had discovered that my paralytic compound, when delivered to a mucous membrane rather than a nerve cluster, caused rapid localized contraction. Toad mucus is produced by mucous membrane glands. It was a hypothesis I'd had for 6 hours and never tested, because I hadn't needed to until right now. I injected the paralytic compound directly into the mucus layer on my dorsal ridge, not into the toad's body, into its secretion. The reaction was immediate and not something I can describe as pleasant. The mucus contracted violently. It pulled away from my scales and pulled my scales toward it simultaneously. Net effect, decreased adhesive contact area, enough for the acid compound to work. I dropped free. I was on the ground. The toad was already repositioning for a second strike. I was also already moving. I had 4 seconds of combat advantage before the toad recalculated its approach. 4 seconds is enough when you know what you're doing and what you're hitting. I hit the toad's palatal nerve cluster, which runs along the roof of the mouth in this species and is only accessible if you can get inside the defensive mucus boundary to reach the head directly. I could reach it because the mucus boundary was already disrupted by my acid secretion. I hit it with a combined paralytic and hemotoxic payload. The toad went still in 6 seconds. One lay beside it for longer than necessary. Not from injury, from the experience of having my calculation fail in a way that had almost killed me. Essence core extracted, rank C. Analyzing, integration, adhesive resistance acquired. Mucus dissolution capability enhanced. Adhesive resistance. The system had taken my survival of an adhesive attack and upgraded my resistance to adhesive compounds. This was useful. I added it to my inventory. What I added more carefully to my inventory was the lesson. I had assumed my cataloging knowledge was complete. It was not complete. This world modifies species. This world's dungeon environments modify species in ways my previous surface research had never needed to account for, and now absolutely had to. Every assumption I brought from my old expertise needed to be tagged. Valid for surface specimens, not necessarily valid for dungeon variants. I sat in the chamber and updated my internal reference system. It took about 20 minutes of sitting very still, updating 30 years of research assumptions. Then I finished clearing the rank C corridor. Total dungeon clearance, Serpent's Cradle complete. Evolution progress, 67%. Special reward, Dungeon AFFINITY passive acquired. Dungeon affinity passive. The system explained this without me asking. It meant that in dungeon environments specifically, my ability to absorb essence from killed creatures was enhanced by 30%, and I recovered from physical damage significantly faster while inside a dungeon environment. The affinity passive had more applications than I'd initially calculated. I had just been given a reason to spend more time in dungeons, as if I needed one. The system was efficient, I would give it that. It rewarded the behavior it wanted to encourage. On day 44, I encountered a human for the first time at close range. Not a hunter, a child, approximately 8 years old, sitting on a rock near my stream. Approximately 8 years old, based on the heat signature and mass, who had apparently wandered considerably further from the village. than any 8-year-old had any sensible reason to wander. She was sitting on a rock near the stream I used as my primary water source, throwing pebbles into the water with the focus and efficiency of someone who has exhausted all other available entertainment options. I observed from 40 meters, pressed flat against a root system. She was alone. Her scent told me she had been out here for at least 2 hours. The sun was past midday. In my previous life, I had been the kind of person who helped lost children find their way back. This was not a conscious moral position so much as an automatic human response I had never examined. Now I was examining it, because helping a lost child when you are a 1-meter serpent presents complications that I had not previously needed to consider. I watched her for a while. She did not appear to be in immediate danger, though the forest around her contained residual essence from the recent surge that would be attractive to certain scavenger species. She also appeared to be talking to a beetle on the rock beside her. I could not hear what she was saying from this distance, but the beetle appeared to be an unwilling participant. I moved closer. Not to help. I told myself this firmly. Purely observational. Assessment only. The fact that I kept moving forward was entirely consistent with that. At 20 meters, I could hear her. She was explaining to the beetle that it needed to find its family and go home, which was, I thought, advice she could have usefully applied to herself. At 10 meters, she looked up from the beetle she'd been lecturing and looked directly at me with no particular alarm, just attention. We regarded each other. Me, a 1-meter rank D serpent with a 3-compound venom profile and an ancient bloodline that was slowly waking up. Her, a child who had apparently run out of beetles to lecture. She said, "Bo, you're big." I flicked my tongue, which, to a human observer, probably looked threatening, but is actually just how I collect information. She did not run. She tilted her head at me with the particular courage of small children everywhere, which is not actually courage so much as an incomplete understanding of what the world can do to them. "Are you the magic snake?" she asked. "Grandma says there's one in the mountain that knows things." I had been in this world 44 days and had apparently become a local legend. I stared at her. I had been in this world for 44 days and nobody had suggested that I was a local legend. This was new information. I did not respond. Obviously, I am a snake. My communication options in the direction of human language were currently 0. She apparently took my continued existence near her as confirmation. "I knew it," she said, with the satisfaction of a child who has been proven right about something the adults dismissed. Then she reached into the small bag she was carrying and produced a piece of dried flatbread and placed it on the rock in front of me. An offering for the magic snake. I looked at the flatbread. I looked at her. The flatbread was nutritionally irrelevant to me. The gesture was the most unexpectedly affecting thing that had happened since I woke up. The flatbread was approximately as useful to me nutritionally as looking at it, but the gesture was the most unexpectedly affecting thing that had happened to me in 44 days. One had been a wandering herbalist for 30 years. I had spent those years being treated as an eccentric at best and a dangerous lunatic at worst. I had not received many offerings. I flicked my tongue at the flatbread, because this was the most dignified response I could manage. Then I turned and moved back into the undergrowth. "Come back sometime," she called after me. "I won't tell anyone, probably." I filed the entire encounter under unexpected, non-threatening, and possibly a complication. The grandmother who had apparently told this child about a magic snake in the mountain was more interesting to me than the child herself. It implied a pre-existing local narrative about this area that I had not considered, which meant there was information about this mountain I hadn't accessed yet. I spent the next days doing additional reconnaissance of the village. I had been monitoring it from a distance. Now I got closer, considerably closer. The village had a name, Ashenvale. It sat in a valley between 2 ridges, with the stream I used as a water source running through its eastern edge. The stream was their primary water supply. I noted this. Shared water source. Whatever happened to that stream affected both of us. This was a form of connection I hadn't consciously registered before. Ashenvale had 3 distinct social structures that I could observe. The farming families, who formed the majority, and who moved in predictable patterns around the agricultural land to the west. The hunters, who operated on a different schedule entirely, departing before dawn and returning with dungeon essence cores that they sold to what appeared to be a small trading post near the village center. And the elders, who moved less but occupied positions of clear social significance based on the deference patterns. I observed. The child's grandmother appeared to be among them. On day 47, something happened at the village that changed my calculations entirely. 3 outsiders arrived. Not hunters from the village, something else. Their equipment was different, higher quality than the local hunters, with a specific scent profile of people who had access to rank B and above dungeon cores regularly. Guild hunters. I recognize the category from the system's ambient knowledge. Independent contractor hunters who operated across regions rather than being tied to a single settlement. Their auras were, to rank C, 1 rank B, the same rank B hunter level as the strongest local hunter, but with a fundamentally different energy. The local rank B hunter felt like someone who had worked very hard to reach his ceiling. These newcomers felt like someone still looking for the next floor up. I observed their arrival from a position in the root system beneath a large oak, at the village's northern entrance. This was the closest I had been to a concentration of humans. Their conversation with the village elder was not entirely audible from my position, but I caught enough. The surge, dungeon activity reports, and a phrase that appeared several times. The secondary source, a secondary dungeon. The beginner's hollow I had cleared, and the serpent's cradle I had now fully cleared, were apparently known to the villagers. But the guild hunters were asking about a secondary source of the surge energy, something that hadn't been mapped. I knew what they were looking for, because I had felt it too, over the past week. A new vibration from the northeast that was different from the serpent's cradle's signature. Deeper, more complex. Something that hadn't opened yet, but was building pressure. A third dungeon, a map, and apparently significant enough that guild hunters had come to investigate it. This changed my timeline considerably. An unmapped dungeon meant unclaimed essence cores. It meant creatures that hadn't been hunted down to the point where they evolved defensively against human hunters. It meant an environment nobody had developed specific counter strategies against. In biological terms, an unexploited niche. In my terms, a significant opportunity. It also meant competition. Guild hunters at rank C and B, with equipment and experience and coordination, entering an unmapped dungeon before I could determine its rank and contents. I made a decision that my wilderness expertise told me was operationally sound, and that competitive logic told me was urgent. I was going to reach the dungeon first. The small remaining human part of me acknowledged. It was also somewhat driven by something adjacent to competitive irritation at the guild hunters. I was going to reach the dungeon first. I left before dawn the next day. Northeast. The vibration in the earth was a compass I didn't need to decode. I had thermal detection precise enough to follow essence traces through rock, and the dungeon affinity passive that made my entire biological system more sensitive to dungeon-related phenomena. I moved faster than I had at any point in this body, pushing every adaptation I had built toward pure sustained speed through difficult terrain. 93 centimeters of rank D serpent with 4 evolved adaptations, 3 active venom compounds, and 1 passive contact delivery system, plus 30 years of cross-country navigation experience running through a body that had spent its entire previous existence moving through exactly this kind of terrain. I reached the dungeon site in 11 hours. The guild hunters, traveling by the road, were at minimum a day behind me, probably more, given that they appeared to be setting up a formal investigation rather than a rapid deployment. The dungeon entrance was different from anything I had seen before. Not a crack in the earth, not a cave entrance. A circle of stones, each one approximately my height, arranged in a pattern the system identified as a convergence array. Natural formations that occur when dungeon energy builds in a single location for long enough. Very long enough. The system's estimate was centuries. Centuries, the system suggested. Maybe longer. Dungeon detected, rank B, the Hollow Throne. Contents, rank B, and rank A creatures. Survival probability, 4%. System note, dungeon demonstrates strong serpent bloodline resonance. Host bloodline response active, 4%. At 23% I had entered the first dungeon without significant hesitation. 4% required me to stop and recalculate everything. Rank of creatures. I was rank D. That gap was not a gap. That was a cliff. For ranks, and rank gaps in this world compounded, a rank of creature wasn't merely better than me by a multiple. It was better than me by a factor that made the comparison between us almost meaningless to express in the same numerical system. But strong serpent bloodline resonance and host bloodline response active. That phrase, bloodline response active, was new. I had not seen that before. Bloodline response explanation. The Hollow Throne dungeon was created by an ancient heavenly serpent. Host bloodline traces to same origin. Dungeon recognizes bloodline and may offer passage beyond standard survival parameters. The dungeon had been made by something in my bloodline, something from the ancient heavenly serpent class that the system had mentioned in my ancestral memory fragment. Whatever my distant ancestor had been, it had been powerful enough to create a dungeon. and the dungeon apparently still recognized the bloodline, diluted and degraded as it was, may offer passage beyond standard survival parameters. That phrase was doing a lot of work. It was not a guarantee, it was a possibility. For percent without bloodline consideration, a known percentage with it. The system was being unusually uncertain, which I interpreted as, this situation has variables I cannot fully model. I sat outside the convergence array for 2 hours. The stones hummed faintly, a vibration that resonated specifically in my scale structure in a way that nothing external had before. The stones hummed faintly, a vibration that resonated specifically in my scale structure in a way that nothing in the external world had resonated since I woke up in this body. It felt, and I say this with full awareness of how strange it sounds, like recognition. Like standing outside a place that had been waiting. On one hand, 4% rank of creatures. The guild hunters were a day away with actual weapons and coordination and the ability to retreat as a group. On the other hand, this dungeon had been waiting for something with my bloodline. The guild hunters had none of it. Whatever was inside, I had an advantage they could not purchase or train for. I had been right about the 23% dungeon, right about the dungeon surge, right about the rank C corridor, with one painful correction that produced an evolution. I had been right about the rank C corridor calculation, with one near fatal correction that had itself produced an evolution. My track record in this world was, survived every situation I had entered with the same approach, careful observation, full information, calculated risk with genuine preparation, then commit. I had observed, I had gathered information. I had the preparation that 30 years of expertise plus 47 days of escalating challenge in this world could provide. I flicked my tongue at the circle of stones. The humming intensified slightly. A response, maybe, or just resonance. I couldn't tell from outside. There was only one way to find out what the bloodline recognition actually meant inside. I entered the hollow throne. The interior was not like the other dungeons. The beginner's hollow had been narrow and damp. The serpent's cradle had been chambers with glowing walls. The hollow throne was something else entirely. It was vast. My thermal detection extended as far as it could reach and still did not find a far wall. The ceiling was high enough that I couldn't sense it either. And the floor was smooth in a way that natural stone is never smooth, worn smooth by something that had moved across it many times over a very long period. Scales. The floor had been worn smooth by scales, not by water or time. Whatever had lived here had been large and had been here for a very long time. The stones in the walls carried essence that was so concentrated it had a physical quality. Light pressure against my scales as I moved through it, and my bloodline resonance, the hum I had felt from outside the stones, was inside me now, activated in a way that the exterior had only suggested was possible. It wasn't just recognition, it was activation. The dormant capabilities the system kept referencing, plural, multiple, I could feel them stirring in a way I hadn't before. Nothing had attacked me yet. In every dungeon I had entered, something had attacked me within the first 10 minutes. 8 minutes into the hollow throne, and the only sound was the hum of concentrated essence and the feel of the smooth stone under my scales. At 12 minutes into the hollow throne, with no attacks and only the hum of ancient essence, the system finally spoke. Bloodline recognition confirmed. Hollow throne access granted. Standard dungeon protocols suspended. Hosts will face bloodline trials instead of standard dungeon encounters. Bloodline Trial 1. Ancestral Memory Immersion. Hosts will experience a fragment of the founding Serpent's history. Completion grants. Dormant ability partial unlock. Bloodline Trials. Not standard combat encounters. Not essence cores from killing creatures. Something entirely different. This dungeon had apparently been waiting for however many centuries to offer exactly this to something that carried the right bloodline into its interior. The memory arrived before I could prepare for it. Not like a vision. More like suddenly being somewhere else while also still being where I was. I was enormous. Not 93 centimeters. Not any measurement in human terms. I was a length of serpent that made the dungeon around me feel small. And the dungeon around me was not small. I was the dungeon around me. Or I had been. Or something that shared my bloodline had been. And I was experiencing the memory from the inside. The founding serpent, my ancestor, impossibly distant, had not built this dungeon. It had become this dungeon. Had chosen to transform itself into a place of concentrated essence. A reservoir of power that would persist long after the body that created it was gone. Why the memory was fractured. I got pieces rather than a complete picture. A war. Something pressing from outside. A choice made under conditions I couldn't fully reconstruct. something that I couldn't identify clearly. Creatures from somewhere the founding serpent called the Outer Dark, pressing against the boundaries of this world. My ancestor had fought, and then had chosen a different way to fight, not with its body, with its continued existence as something other than a body. The dungeon was a weapon. It had been made as a weapon, a concentrated source of power that the right inheritor could use when the time came. When whatever came from the Outer Dark came again, the memory released me. I was back in my 93 centimeters, the smooth stone floor, the vast darkness, and something had changed. Bloodline Trial 1. Complete. Dormant ability partial unlock. Scale resonance. Host scales now interact with essence fields passively. Ambient dungeon essence absorbed automatically at current location. Scale resonance. Passive essence absorption. While I was standing in the hollow throne, I was absorbing concentrated ancestral essence without doing anything. The growth counter in my field of awareness was climbing steadily upward with every breath I took, with every second I remained in the ancestral essence field. Evolution progress, 67% gives 71% gives 74%. It was climbing, just from standing here, just from existing in a dungeon that recognized my bloodline. I had approximately 18 hours before the guild hunters arrived, assuming they moved efficiently. In 18 hours, standing in concentrated ancestral essence, with passive absorption running and multiple bloodline trials presumably waiting to be completed. My arithmetic was becoming very interesting very quickly. The second trial began without announcement. Not a memory this time, a presence. Something in the dungeon that was not an empty dungeon. It appeared at the far edge of my thermal detection. A heat signature enormous enough that my enhanced sense struggled to process the full outline. Moving toward me, it moved slowly, with the particular patience of something that has been waiting so long that the difference between soon and now has lost all meaning. A serpent, rank A. No, the system said nothing because the system apparently did not have a clean category for what was moving toward me. It was a remnant, a fragment of the founding serpent's essence that the dungeon had preserved in semi-material form. Not alive in the way I was alive, with a body and a hunger and a system taking upward. Not dead in the way dead things are dead, with nothing left at all. Something in between, something that the dungeon had been holding in suspension for whatever period of time had passed since my ancestor chose to transform. Bloodline Trial 2 Endurance Recognition. Host must survive contact with the remnant for a minimum duration. Completion grants dormant ability partial unlock scale resonance enhanced. Survive contact. Not defeat. Not kill. Survive for a minimum duration that the system declined to specify, which I filed under. The system occasionally has a sense of drama. I thought about the filing system I've been building since day one. Every piece of information, categorized, cross-referenced, available on demand. Every behavioral observation from 47 days of careful study. Every venom interaction I had cataloged. Every geological feature I had memorized. None of it was precisely relevant to surviving contact with a semi-material remnant of an ancestral divine serpent. This was the category of situation that 30 years of herbalist expertise had not covered. I acknowledged this clearly and didn't let it stop me. I had 30 years of herbalist expertise. I had 47 days of this world's escalating challenges. I had an evolving bloodline that was slowly remembering what it used to be. And I had something that none of those categories quite captured. Stubbornness is the word most people would use. I preferred commitment to the process regardless of outcome probability. Call it the quality that makes a man follow venomous snakes into forgotten forests for 3 decades, when everyone around him says to stop. I had that. I had always had that. And in this body, in this dungeon, facing something that made my thermal detection blur at the edges from sheer scale. That quality was the only calculation that mattered. The remnant reached me, vast and ancient and humming with the compressed memory of something that had once moved mountains. And I held my ground. Here is something nobody who has only ever been human understands about surviving contact with something ancient. It is not about strength. It is not about venom or adaptations or evolved capabilities or any of the measurable things that the system tracked and ranked and assigned numbers to. It is about not moving, about choosing in the presence of something that makes every instinct in your body scream to leave, to stay exactly where you are. The remnant was enormous. My thermal detection, which had been telling me useful things about the world for 47 days, simply stopped being adequate. The heat signature was too large to resolve into a shape. What I detected was scale, presence, and the deep vibration of something with more mass than the concept of mass usually implies. The way that very large things in small spaces compress the air differently was part of it, detectable through my lateral line in patterns that had no equivalent in any prior experience. My lateral line, the sense organ along my flanks that detected vibration, was registering something that had no equivalent in any prior experience, human or serpent. It was like standing next to a wall that was also a song that was also a very old memory. That is genuinely the best description I can manage, and I am aware it is insufficient. The remnant moved toward me, not aggressively, not like a predator approaching prey, more like gravity, a direction things moved in because that was the direction things moved. I held my ground. I want to be precise about what that cost me. Every biological system one possessed was running survival calculations and outputting the same answer. Away. Go. Now. I said no. 30 years of telling my body that his assessment of a situation was incomplete had given me practice at this. It was still the hardest thing I had done in 47 days. The remnant reached me. Contact was not physical in the way that contact with a stone crawler or a dungeon rat had been physical. It was more like being recognized than being touched. Something very old looked at something very young that carried an echo of what it had once been. And then it did something I had not expected at all. It went still. The remnant, vast and semi-material and humming with compressed ancestral memory, went still in the way that a teacher goes still when they have found the student they were waiting for. For seconds passed. The system counted them for me with a kind of quiet precision that I had come to appreciate about it. Bloodline Trial 2, Endurance Recognition complete. Result, passed without minimum duration. Post-bloodline strength exceeded trial threshold. Immediate reward granted. Dormant ability unlocked. Serpent's Will. Host may now project intent through ambient essence. Effective range. Current body length +1 meter. Creatures within range detect host's will without physical signal. Serpent's Will. I sat with that for a moment. Projecting intent through ambient essence. At my current size, effective range was a little under 2 meters. At larger sizes, the range would grow. It was, I realized, exactly the ability that a creature establishing territorial dominance in a world where most communication had been physical would need most. And it was also, I realized, the ability that a creature trying to communicate without sound would find extremely useful. The remnant had not simply tested me. It had given me the thing I was going to need next, before I knew I needed it. Either the dungeon was intelligent in ways the system hadn't fully explained, or my ancestor had been good enough at long-term planning that they'd anticipated what a descendant would require. Both possibilities were interesting in different ways. I filed them both carefully under things that deserved more thought later, and kept moving into the dungeon. The remnant dispersed after the trial. Not dramatically. No sound, no light, just a gradual decrease in the heat signature until my thermal detection reported only the dungeon's ambient temperature. It was like watching fog lift in reverse. I was alone in the hollow throne, and the evolution counter was at 91%, 9% from rank C. In a dungeon saturated with ancestral essence, with passive absorption running through the scaled resonance ability. I calculated the time. The guild hunters were roughly 12 hours away. I had been in the dungeon for approximately 2 hours. At the current absorption rate, with the ancestral essence this concentrated, I would hit the evolution threshold in approximately 4 hours. The timing was workable. This meant I had time, and the dungeon had indicated there were more trials. Bloodline Trial 1, Bloodline Trial 2. The numbering implied at least a third. I moved deeper into the hollow throne, following the smooth worn floor that continued into a darkness my thermal detection could barely find the edges of. The walls curved in a way that suggested I was moving through what had once been the interior of something much larger. Not a cave carved by water, but a space that had been shaped by a living thing. My ancestor. I was walking through what was effectively the fossil of a divine serpent that had chosen, deliberately and completely, to become a place rather than a creature. Third trial came as I reached the center of the dungeon. I knew it was the center because my lateral sense detected equidistant vibration from all directions simultaneously. Perfect center. The system spoke, and for the first time, it felt less like a notification and more like something had been waiting to say this. Bloodline Trial 3, Inheritance Acceptance. Host must choose whether to accept full bloodline designation. Accepting will permanently mark host as heir to the hollow throne. Refusing will allow host to retain anonymity and avoid bloodline-based threats. Accepting unlocks all remaining dormant abilities simultaneously. Evolution threshold cleared regardless of current progress. Rank advancement, D to C immediately. Refusing, current abilities retained. Gradual bloodline development continues. Host remains undetected as bloodline inheritor. I read it twice, then a third time. Accept and become the heir to the Hollow Throne with full ability unlock and immediate rank advancement. Refuse and stay hidden. Continue gradual development. Keep the advantage of being the thing nobody was watching. This was the most interesting decision the system had presented since day one. When I had seen survive as the entire contents of my instructions and decided to take it seriously, I thought about what I knew. The guild hunters outside, specifically here because of abnormal dungeon activity, would detect bloodline designation if they had any tools for it. Guild hunters at that level carried essence detection equipment. Bloodline designation of this strength would be visible to someone with the right tools, the way a bonfire is visible in a dark field. I thought about the child in the village who had already told me I was a local legend, about the grandmother's narrative that had made me into a magic snake before I'd done anything particularly magical, about the rank B hunter from the village who had passed near my territory and whose aura felt like a bonfire even when he wasn't doing anything. A hunter who had handled a rank B dungeon surge with what sounded, from my position inside a rock crack, like experienced and measured professional competence. And I thought about the outer dark, about the fragments of my ancestor's memory, about the thing my ancestor had built this entire dungeon to prepare a weapon against. Whatever that was, it had not gone away just because my ancestor chose to fight it differently. The founding Serpent's memory had shown me a war. Wars don't end because one side transforms itself into a dungeon. They pause, they accumulate pressure, and then they resume when the conditions are right. If the outer dark was still out there, still pressing, the guild hunters and the village hunters and every rank human in the area were, in the long calculation, on my side. Not allies exactly, not yet, but not enemies. The advantage of being undetected was real. The advantage of being immediately more capable in a world where something ancient was building toward a return was also real. I thought about what kind of decision my ancestor would have made, given what I'd seen of them and the memory fragment. A creature powerful enough to transform itself into a dungeon. A creature who had chosen to sacrifice its individual existence for the long game. That was not a creature who made timid decisions. I accepted. The response was immediate and total and, from a stealth perspective, immediately problematic. My scales lit up with the luminescence of inherited bloodline recognition. Not metaphorically, literally luminescent, each scale catching the dungeon's concentrated essence and refracting it in patterns that I suspected were visible from outside the convergence array. This was, from a stealth perspective, a problem. But I had made the decision knowing this, and there was no taking it back. And more importantly, what happened next made the stealth concern feel small. Inheritance accepted, full bloodline designation, heir of the ancient heavenly serpent, the Hollow Throne. Dormant abilities unlocked. 1. Sovereign Venom. Host Venom now carries bloodline authority. Creatures below host rank will instinctively submit upon contact. Creatures above host rank will experience accelerated venom effect. TWO Hollow Throne domain. Host may designate a territory. Within territory, host senses and capabilities increase by 40%. Territory recognized by dungeon system as host domain. 3. Essence Devour. Host may absorb essence directly from living creatures through extended physical contact without consuming them. Rank advancement initiated. D2C. I did not experience the rank advancement the way I had experienced the previous evolutions. Those had been restructuring, cellular, felt from the inside. This was different. This was something unlocking. Like a door that had always been there finally being open, and finding that the room behind it was larger than the building that contained the door. I lay flat on the smooth floor of the Hollow Throne while the advancement completed. I did not count the minutes. The system counted them for me. When it was finished, I was 112 centimeters long, rank C. An heir with a domain and a sovereign venom and the ability to absorb essence without killing. And the dungeon, which had been a dungeon, had done something new. The convergence array outside had shifted. I could feel it through the stone and the essence field and my new domain sense. The Hollow Throne had just registered me as its owner, which meant, according to dungeon system logic, that it was now my dungeon. My domain. A dungeon that my ancestor had created specifically to be a weapon in a coming war was now legally mine. I was 112 centimeters long. I took a moment to appreciate the gap between what the system considered significant and what my physical body represented. Then I heard voices outside the convergence array. The guild hunters had made the journey in 8 hours instead of my estimated 12. I filed this revision of their capability assessment immediately. The guild hunters had moved faster than I calculated. 12 hours was my estimate. They had made it in 8. This said something about their capabilities that I filed immediately. 3 voices. To rank C, 1 Rank B. I recognized the Rank B's voice from the village. It was the local hunter, not one of the guild outsiders. He had apparently joined them, which made the group 5 people total and considerably more capable than 3 guild hunters alone. I could hear them clearly through the dungeon stone, through the domain sense that extended to the edge of my claimed territory, which included the array. My new domain sense extended through the earth of the Hollow Throne's territory, and the convergence array sat at the edge of what I was now recognizing as my own ground. The array is active, one of the guild hunters said. Something triggered a bloodline inheritance. You can see the resonance from here. What bloodline? The Rank B local hunter. His voice had the careful quality of someone who had survived long enough to ask questions before doing things. Ancient class. Don't have a clean read on the species. A pause. Equipment sounds. Whatever it is. It accepted inheritance about 20 minutes ago. Glow is still fading. Is it hostile? The local Rank B hunter again. He kept asking the right questions, which was the most useful thing I had observed about anyone in 48 days. Unknown. Bloodline inheritances don't automatically mean hostile. Depends on the species. Depends on the inheritor's disposition. Ancient classes are complicated. I processed this. They knew something had accepted inheritance. They did not know what. They did not know the species. And the local Rank B hunter was asking whether it was hostile, not assuming it was. That was significant. The assumption of hostility would have told me something. The question told me something different and more useful. I made a decision about the guild hunters and approximately for seconds. Then I moved to the convergence array entrance and waited. There was a long silence from outside when I emerged through the convergence array, moving at the pace of something that has decided it is not in a hurry and means the decision. I was 112 centimeters of rank C Serpent, scale still carrying the faint luminescence of the inheritance ceremony, moving through the stone circle at the pace of something that had decided it was not in a hurry and meant that entirely. I stopped at the edge of the circle and looked at them. My new thermal detection showed me 5 people in a spread formation, hands on weapons, but not weapons drawn. The correct response to an unknown contact that hasn't shown hostile intent, hands near weapons but not on them. Spread formation, wait for information before acting. That's a snake, said one of the rank C guild hunters, with the tone of someone who expected to say something more impressive and has been caught off guard by reality. That's the bloodline inheritor, said the rank B local hunter quietly, with the careful weight of someone revising their threat assessment in real time. I flicked my tongue. Information arrived. 5 people, mixed levels of anxiety. 1. The rank B local hunter, with a fundamentally different response than the others. Not fear, something closer to recognition. I looked directly at him. He looked directly at me, and I used the serpent's will. Not aggressively, not as a threat. I projected the clearest, simplest intent I could construct. Not hostile. Here by right, not interested in conflict. The rank B hunter took a small, involuntary step back. Not from threat, from the experience of receiving information through a channel that no human had been designed to process. He recovered quickly and held his ground, which told me what I needed to know about him. Did it just? One of the guild hunters started. Yes, said the rank B hunter, with the quiet authority of someone who was reprocessing a situation and doing it faster than the people around him. Don't move. Don't draw. It's communicating. There was a silence. The guild hunters looked at their rank B colleague and then at me and made the calculation that the most experienced person present saying don't move was worth listening to. I held the serpent's will steady, not hostile, here by right, not interested in conflict. 3 concepts, clearly projected, into the ambient essence that he had apparently learned to read. The rank B hunter made a gesture with his left hand, open palm forward, which apparently means the same thing across every civilization that is ever needed to signal no weapon ready. I recognize it not from this world's custom specifically, but from the cross-cultural pattern that shows up in every human society that is ever needed to communicate peaceful intent. I filed this man carefully, rank B. Patient, smart enough to interpret a situation correctly under pressure, willing to communicate rather than escalate. These were qualities that had survival value in any environment. They also had specific value to me in ways I was only beginning to understand the full shape of. The guild hunters were a different calculation, professional, capable, and motivated by guild interests that I had no data on yet. They were variables. The guild hunters remained variables with unknown motivations. The local hunter was beginning, through consistent evidence, to look more like a reliable constant. I turned and moved back through the convergence array. The Hollow Throne accepted me through its entrance and the dungeon settled around me with the specific quality of a place that recognizes its owner. Behind me, as I returned to the dungeon, I heard the local hunter say with a particular quiet that carries further than shouting, "We don't go in after it." One of the guild hunters started to argue. The local hunter cut him off with a particular quiet authority of someone who does not repeat themselves. "We don't go in after it. File your report. Note the bloodline inheritance. Note the inheritor demonstrated non-hostile intent through essence communication. Note that the dungeon is now a claimed domain." A pause. Then, also note that we had no casualties, which is what happens when you don't chase an ancient bloodline inheritor into its own dungeon. I processed this from inside my dungeon while the evolution counter finished its climb. Evolution progress, 100%. Rank C advancement, complete. COMPLETEI was rank C in 48 days. In a world where most people spend years reaching rank C, where the guild hunter standing outside my dungeon had likely spent a decade each, the system provided an updated status readout. 112 centimeters, rank C. 3 active venom compounds plus synthesis capability. 5 passive adaptations. Domain territory established. Sovereign venom. Hollow throne domain affinity. Essence devour capability. Serpents will range 2 meters and 14 centimeters. And the bloodline, heir of the ancient heavenly serpent, the hollow throne. No longer forgotten. No longer degraded. The system had updated the designation. What the system had not updated was the threat embedded in my ancestors' memory. The outer dark, whatever had pressed against this world hard enough to demand the sacrifice of a divine serpent. Whatever had pressed against this world hard enough that a divine serpent chose to transform itself into a weapon rather than fight with its body. That was still out there. My ancestor had prepared for its return. That preparation was now mine. I spent 3 days in the hollow throne after the guild hunters left. They camped outside for 1 day, filing reports, measuring essence output, doing the professional assessment that guild hunters did when they encountered something outside their standard parameters. Then they left. The guild hunters departed efficiently, as professionals do when their work is complete. The local rank B hunter was the last to go, and he went slowly. He stood outside the convergence array for a few minutes before he left. Long enough that I suspected he was doing something deliberate, rather than just taking a slow departure. He placed something at the edge of the array before he walked away, small, cloth-wrapped. I retrieved it after he was gone. It was dried meat, high quality, the kind that hunters ate on long assignments, preserved with dungeon essence compounds that kept it good for months, and wrapped around it was a strip of cloth with 2 characters marked on it and away. That suggested someone who wanted to communicate but had limited options. I could read it because reincarnation, as I had established on day 1 when I woke up and found I still understood the language around me, apparently keeps your languages completely intact. The characters said, in the old regional script that the area still used for formal records, present, not a gift, an acknowledgement. You are here, and I am not pretending otherwise. Not a gift. Exactly. More like an acknowledgement. You are here. I know you are here. I am not pretending otherwise. I held the meat in my mouth for a moment. Nutritional value, moderate. Informational value, the most significant communication I had received in 48 days from any living person. The rank B hunter knew I existed, knew I had accepted the bloodline inheritance, and had chosen to acknowledge my presence rather than report it as a threat. He was either strategically sophisticated or genuinely decent. Both possibilities were worth tracking. I ate the meat. Nutrition absorbed. Growth progress, 1.2%. I allowed myself a moment, not quite a feeling, but the functional equivalent of one, for what had happened over 48 days. A wandering herbalist had died in his research hut, killed by a snake he had spent 8 years studying, and woken up as an F-rank serpent in a rock crack. Gerald had been remarkably efficient about the whole thing. 8 years I had spent studying him, and he had gotten the most important work done in about 11 seconds. Now I was a rank C heir with sovereign venom, a domain dungeon, and 3 dormant ability slots the system kept mentioning without filling. Which meant the bloodline had more to offer than I had reached yet. Which meant the work ahead was longer and deeper than the work behind. Outside my dungeon, a village of 200 people was surviving a wartime famine with climbing taxes and dungeons breaching once a month. And a rank B hunter who had just demonstrated the ability to interpret essence communication from a non-human entity, which was a skill set I had not expected to encounter this early, and somewhere beyond this world's surface. In whatever the founding serpent had called the outer dark, something was still pressing. My ancestor had made a dungeon, had given up its body to become a weapon, had waited, preserved in essence form, for someone with the right blood to come along and accept the inheritance. 48 days of this world. For ranked evolutions. 1 domain claim. 1 contact with a human capable of nonverbal communication across species. And a growing understanding of why I was here that extended beyond survival. I was not simply the most qualified consciousness to inhabit this bloodline. I was the intended inheritor. My 30 years of serpent expertise, my field experience, my particular brand of stubborn, patient, methodical competence. These were not coincidences, or if they were coincidences, they were the kind that function exactly like a plan when you look at them from far enough back. I flicked my tongue. The domain around me tasted like home, which is a strange thing to say about a dungeon made from a divine serpent's transformed body. But I had stopped requiring things to make comfortable sense around day 3 of this new life, and had not started again since. There was work to do. There was always work to do when you are for ranks from S-class with a war brewing in the cosmological background and a local rank B hunter who had just left you dried meat. I was going to keep growing, keep evolving. The Hollow Throne had more trials waiting. I could feel them in the dungeon structure, future tests that would unlock the remaining dormant capabilities. I was going to learn everything there was to learn about this world, every dungeon within range, every faction, every political structure, every threat. Knowledge was the resource that compounded most reliably in my experience, and I had 30 years of deliberate practice and exactly the kind of accumulation. And the Outer Dark was going to come back eventually. That was not a question. That was what ancient wars and the memories of divine serpents meant. They come back. They always come back. When it did, it was going to find a rank C serpent was not what was waiting for it. Because rank C was not where I was going. It was where I was passing through. The rank B local hunter's name, I found out much later through the particular information channels available to something with domain sense in a territory, was Caden. He had been assigned to Ashenvale 8 years ago when dungeon activity first increased, and had stayed because the people needed him. Rank B hunters who had made location choices based on need, rather than financial reward, were rarer than the system's clean rank categories made them sound. He came back to the Convergence Array, 11 days after the guild hunters left, alone this time. He sat outside the stones for an hour, which I observed through my domain sense, before he said anything. I don't know if you understand me, he said, finally. But I figure, if you could communicate intent through essence, you can probably follow language. He was right. I could follow language perfectly well. I had been following every conversation near my territory this entire time and building an extensive profile of the area. I just had no way to confirm it that didn't involve either alarming him severely or doing something that would require significant explanation. The village has a problem, Caden said, after a careful pause. 3rd dungeon breach in a month. And the outer fields are too dangerous for farming now. We've got farmers who can't farm because the outer fields are too dangerous. And we can't handle the dungeons fast enough with 3 hunters. He paused. I don't know what you want. I don't know what an ancient bloodline inheritor wants in general. But you've been in this mountain for a while, based on the Essence Trail. And you haven't hurt anyone. Another pause. The girl you met at the stream says you're the magic. Snake that knows things. I'm choosing to take that at face value. I was still. He was still. The Convergence Array hummed between us with the particular quality of a place that has been waiting a long time and is now watching something finally happen. I can't pay you, he said. I don't have anything an ancient serpent needs. But if you're planning to stay in this mountain, we're going to be neighbors regardless. I'd rather be good neighbors. I considered this for a long time. Not because the decision was unclear, but because I wanted to understand precisely what I was deciding and why. I was a rank Sierra and a domain dungeon with capabilities that were still expanding. The village had active dungeon problems. The mathematics of this were not complicated. The village had problems that were manageable with my current abilities and would become even more manageable as I continued developing. The Outer Dark was coming back. When it did, I was going to need to be stronger than I currently was by a margin I could not yet fully calculate. And every challenge, every threat, everything that pushed me to apply my capabilities at the edge of what I could do, that made me stronger. A village on the edge of my territory, with active dungeon problems and a rank B hunter who communicated in good faith. That was not an obstacle to my development. That was exactly the environment I needed. Escalating challenges, a cooperative contact, territory I was already in the process of claiming. The mathematics were not complicated. That was exactly the environment I needed. Good neighbors. He had offered good neighbors. He didn't know what he was offering, quite. He thought he was offering a truce with a local predator. He was offering me, without knowing this precisely, a purpose and context and set of escalating problems that would accelerate everything I was in the process of becoming. I emerged from the convergence race slowly. Caden held very still, which showed good instincts. I stopped at the edge of the stones, 3 meters from him, and I used the Serpent's will. Not hostile, here by right, agreed. He exhaled slowly. The tension in his body decreased in the specific way that tension decreases when a decision that could have gone badly has gone well. Good, he said, quietly, like a man who has been holding his breath for 11 days and has finally remembered how lungs work. I turned back toward the hollow throne, then stopped, because there was one more thing I wanted him to know. Something about the nature of what he had just made an agreement with. I sent one more pulse of Serpent's will. Not words, not concepts exactly. Something more fundamental. A sense of scale of time. Of the difference between what I was now and what I was becoming. Of the weight of the bloodline I was carrying and what it had been created to face. Caden stood very still for a moment after receiving it. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Not afraid. Something more complicated than afraid. The emotion that people experience when they realize the size of what they've been dealing with and are grateful they handled it the right way. Right, he said. Right, I'll right. He took a step back, then stopped. The girl wants to know if you have a name. I had not thought about a name. I had been 48 days in this world and had been too busy surviving to have opinions about nomenclature. Gerald was taken, obviously. I sent one more pulse of Serpent's will. An impression of ancient darkness, of scales older than mountains, of something that had been waiting so long that time had become irrelevant. The best name I could render in intention rather than language. Caden nodded slowly. I'll tell her something, he said. Something appropriate. He walked back toward Ashenvale. I watched him through my domain sense until he passed out of range. Then I turned back to my dungeon, my territory, the weapon my ancestor had made and that I had inherited. The hollow throne settled around me. The ancestral essence ran through the stone like a slow pulse. The evolution counter, reset after the rank advancement, showed 0% and waited. I was rank C. I had a domain. I had a bloodline that was still waking up. I had a war to prepare, for that most of the world didn't know was coming. And I had, apparently, a neighbor who had thought carefully about how to approach an ancient bloodline inheritor, and had landed on dried meat and an honest statement of the situation. And a child who was going to name me something entirely inappropriate that I would nonetheless end up responding to, because that's how names work when someone who trusts you gives them. Not yet S-class, not yet ready for what was coming from the outer dark. But no longer the 40-centimeter F-rank serpent pressed flat in a rock crack watching a hawk that wanted to eat it. 48 days, the distance from F to C, from prey to air, from a man who knew everything about snakes to a snake that was becoming something no one had cataloged. Gerald had done me a favor, actually. Not that I would ever tell him. The work continued. It always continues. And in a mountain that was now my territory, with a dungeon that was now my weapon and a bloodline that was now remembering what it had always been. I was exactly where I needed to be, which is where the underestimated always end up. Given enough time, and enough patience, and enough stubbornness to keep going. When the calculation says the odds aren't good,